Hello, Doug. This fine day, we find ourselves, instead of being outside enjoying it, we're looking at some of these slides. Thank you for joining me. Today's subject is Dave Decker.
Well, Travis, I appreciate you having me on. It's always enlightening and very informative, and I look forward to today's topic, the Dave Decker topic.
So this goes back to September of 2015. I was attending a county committee meeting. And back in those times, I was attending a lot of committee meetings. And I just happened to hear the treasurer, Mr. Swan, tell the board that he was going to have to write off some funds because by law, an uncollected fund has to be written off after so many years. So this is a snapshot from his report to you guys showing that he had a receivable from Lake George Watershed Conference for $102,500 dating back to 2007. And he was going to have to just write it off. I think most people just shrugged that off. It certainly piqued my interest. And I didn't know anything about the Lake George Watershed Conference, and nobody else was saying they knew a whole lot about it. So that's when I started my investigations to try to find out just what is this all about and how come the county's going to be out it's a nice chunk of change. So I started to attend. First of all, I found out what the Lake George Watershed Coalition was all about. And it was actually being administered by the town of Queensbury, town of Lake George, or village of Lake George, and the town of Bolton. In this case, the particular sum of money that was due the county was from the Queensbury portion of this. So I started to attend the Queensbury meetings and asking questions about, Lake George Watershed Coalition and the reasons for why the town is supporting it and why aren't they paying their bills, etc. And I just was getting nowhere. I was just, I was asking questions and, they're saying, whatever, they really wouldn't say anything. And now we are 9 months later and I'm still asking questions. And it happens to come up that they want to give some additional work to David Decker. So here's the minutes of the meeting showing that I had questioned it. So did John Salvador at that time, because he was also concerned about a lack of performance on a project that was right at the lake where he had his buildings. So, we got nowhere, but I had been in contact with the sheriff and I filed a complaint with the sheriff and he started doing some investigations as well. He found some significant information. He was interviewing other people that were complaining about not getting money. He found some wrongdoing and he he arrested Decker back in June of 2017. So now we're 2 years into this.
Okay,
Go ahead.
so let's just recap here. You show up to a committee meeting. I was at that committee meeting. I remember you saying, you questioning, well, why are we writing off X amount of dollars? Treasurer Swan saying we got to write it off because we can't get payment. We can't get payment. So the way this works is, for people out there, is David Decker would be each town, Queensbury, Bolton Landing, Lake George, the village of Lake George, would be the grantee, which means they're the ones who get the money from the state, and then they hire basically David Decker to go do good work. There's a lot of things that he did well. The problem was, as Travis dug in and found out, and I remember him calling me one time, I'm on the bike trail telling me, you found this stuff that you think is fraud. And I'm on the bike trail. I said, go for it. If they're frauding the people, the taxpayers, out of money, definitely pursue it. and you did great work. So anyway, this David Decker basically was what, the town of Queensbury would be, get money from the state. The Queensbury then would give the money to Decker to pay all the vendors for doing work on a number of different projects. Okay, go ahead.
And so that's why he was arrested, because they found that he was not paying people, that some of the people he was paying were himself, and actually one company in particular that was his company, but was really just a PO box in his town. At any rate, I don't want to get into all the details. That shortly after the arrest, the coalition, who must have had some ideas about some of this stuff going on, but at any rate, they went ahead and cut all their ties with him. And as the investigation continued, this is after the arrest, but as it continued, the sheriff now is talking to other people. He's trying to get information from the town. He's trying to get information from the Department of State, etc. And at one point, he finds that several years prior to all these questions, prior to when I saw this, Mr. Swan had said, there had been an audit. And so the town was audited. In fact, the town of Bolton and the village of Lake George was also audited. And the conclusion was that David Decker wasn't doing things correctly, and the town wasn't doing things correctly. But the interesting thing was that the town board was oblivious to this. I mean,
never informed.
Never informed. I mean, the supervisor, Strow, was doing all the work, and he went ahead and even, I'll come back to this in a second. Here's the key findings of that audit: that the town of Queensbury, did wrong, and
failed to properly document and report required local match for 3 of the 5 contracts renewed.
yeah,
Then it also states how the town of Queensbury failed to appropriately manage and oversee environmental protection fund local waterfront revitalization program contracts by fully relying on one subcontractor without engaging in significant review of the work of that subcontractor. In a nutshell, the state says, hey, we'll give you the money, town of Queensbury, but you got to make sure that everything is done legal, everything is done according to the law, and that there's no shortcuts and no fraudulent acts. And Mr. Strow signed off on it, saying that's what we did. We did our due diligence. In essence, they did not do their due diligence, as the state is clearly pointing out. Is that correct, Mr. Whitehead?
that's right. And this audit came out in October of 2015, which is just about the time that I started asking questions about David Decker. Now, Mr. Strow is telling me he doesn't know anything, and he's certainly not telling his board that he doesn't know anything. Yet here on Town of Queensbury letterhead is his response to the Department of State on that audit, and he's saying, thank you for reviewing it, and we're going to make these changes. There's no doubt that it was an audit, and if I were on the board and I found out that I wasn't even told that my town went ahead and wrote this, I think I'd be very upset, because you're talking about my town, problems at my town. I'm an elected official. I should know about it, but that's not what happened. It all stayed there, right with the right with Mr. Strow. Now, when the board did find out about that, they were pretty upset, and it got into a newspaper article. And John's starting to say, well, it really wasn't an audit. Well, I mean, if it wasn't an audit, I don't know why he wrote a response to it. And so he pens a letter to the person that was responsible for the audit and basically says, this thing wasn't an audit, was it? And she writes back that clearly this is an audit, there's no doubt about it.
let's recap that. So the state says, hey, town of Queensbury, you did all these things wrong. The supervisor Stroud does not even show his board, hides it, then responds to the audit, but says it's not an audit. He tells the state, well, it wasn't an audit when he.
Well, let me stop you right there. He's not telling the state, he's telling the Post-Star.
Yeah, the
that it wasn't an
Post-Star,
audit.
correct.
Okay,
And yes, and he's called out basically by his own board saying, why didn't you tell us? He's saying it wasn't an audit. And clearly the state replied back, yeah, this is an audit, and you responded and so forth. So obviously there's some serious miscommunication going on by the supervisor with his own board.
so in the end, the trial lasted a couple of years. Here we are in September 9th of 2020. And Mr. Decker's sentenced to 8 to 24 years. He's recently, he's appealed that, and just very recently, they've turned down a second appeal. So it seems like he is going to be serving time, starting in 23 or sometime soon, after being arrested in 2017. So here's an example, and I know this has galled you as much as it's galled me. This is an example of the town of Queensbury writing a check for $476,566.96 to David Decker, private individual. And then he hoped, with the hope that he'll go ahead and take that $476,000 and pay off all the different people that deserve it. Now, this had to go and be signed off by the board. Every month, well, every meeting, which maybe is twice a month, they have a list of all the payments made by the town since the last meeting. Usually it's $1 million. Sometimes it's a little less, sometimes it's a little more, but it averages about $1 million a pop. I've never seen any board member question anything in any of those $1 million, they just approve it. I mean, just approve it without any discussion. What about this 100,000? What about this 476,000? I mean, you'd think somebody would be doing it.
Yeah, they write a $500,000 check to David J. Decker like it's nothing.
Yep.
Comes out of the town coffers.
Yep.
Now, again, they had to sign, they being the supervisor at the time, has to sign off saying they've done their due diligence, they've checked to make sure everything is correct and above board, and that they then release the check to Decker, who then is supposed to pay all the vendors. But Queensbury's on the hook for the accountability, and yet they didn't do their due diligence. They were, and the end result, obviously, being David J. Decker was convicted of fraud. And when you say fraud, that means your tax dollar, mine, and everybody else's. He stole.
One thing I also want to point out on this check is that it was written in 2011, and it was signed by Dan Steck at that point. I mean, this whole problem with Decker goes way back into the early 2000s. Stroud was on the board at this time, so he would have seen this check, but it was actually signed by Dan Steck, who was the supervisor at that moment. And I think I'm just going to leave it there.
Yeah.
I mean, this is pretty much unbelievable. But the more I look at these things, the worse it gets. But and we'll be having some more things in the future.
This is just another example. I appreciate you bringing all this to light, Mr. Whitehead. The fact of the matter is the airport boondoggle. The fact of the matter is the David J. Decker fraud, committing fraud. And the county ended up being out thousands of dollars because Decker was supposed to pay the county because we were a vendor on one of the projects. It goes on and on and on. And I hope we continue this series of major problems that you actually brought to light early on or during it. And it didn't stop until sometimes arrests were made. So stay tuned, and we will be bringing you more. Thank you. Great job, Mr. Whitehead. Thanks for having me on. It was my pleasure.